Hey, what is up everybody, this is Armin and I am back, and today we're going to be looking at all the Easter eggs from Daredevil Season 2 on Netflix, so let's just get right into that. So let's start it off with Grudo, who is from Frank Miller's Daredevil run from 1981 issue 168. In the comics, his first appearance was actually the same first appearance of Electra, and in the comics he worked under Kingpin and would end up teaming up with Turk. And we can expect to see Turk in Luke Cage. So a lot of Season 2 focuses on the Punisher, and there are actually many callbacks to former Punisher things. One of these is a callback to the Thomas Jane version of the Punisher. When inside of Josie's bar, which is a typical hangout place for Karen, Foggy, and Matt, there are quite a few posters that have the logos for Wild Turkey. Now if you guys watch the Thomas Jane version of the Punisher, this is the only drink he constantly keeps downing throughout the movie. So during the third episode of Season 2, we actually see that the Punisher captures Matt Murdock. He gives him a choice: kill Grotto or watch me assassinate him. This is almost an exact pull from the comics. Even using certain lines, we actually see that the Daredevil has the revolver taped to his hands, and even the same dialogue that the Punisher uses, the one I make every time I pull the trigger. And as I just talked about Electra, let's talk a little bit quickly about the joyride they go on in a car which she steals. That is actually straight from the comics, written by Frank Miller and John Romita Jr. from Daredevil, The Man Without Fear. So of course another familiar face that returns to Daredevil is Melvin. Now he is of course the guy that makes Daredevil's suit, who actually gets him to make him a new headpiece and some new armor. But the interesting thing here is he actually shows off his own armor he has underneath his shirt, which is a direct reference to Gladiator's armor from the comics. And not only that, in his shop there are quite a few posters that actually have gladiators all over them. This actually being a double Easter egg, since in Season 1, that season was actually run by Stephen DeKnight, who was behind the hit series Spartacus featuring gladiators. Now during the second season, we actually see that the Punisher has a dog. This is actually Max, who is in the comics, and he actually ends up recruiting the dog after he kills a bunch of Irish mobsters. This is seen in Punisher Warzone number 37. And speaking of Gladiator, I should mention that at the end of the season, he actually gets a brand new weapon seen before in the comics, the Billy Club, which he can use as a walking stick and also actually use it as a weapon. We see him use it in a multitude of ways, including swinging. Now we also see Frank in a familiar vehicle. If you guys watch the show, you will notice that he has a van which he actually rigs to explode. This is actually something very common for the Punisher, as he is constantly shown to have a van fully stocked with all sorts of equipment and weapon ready to take out villains. Now let's go on to something that we've actually seen before, the Dogs of Hell. Now if you guys have been watching Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. way back when, in the episode Yes Ma'am, which was the 15th episode of the first season, when Lorelei, the sister of Enchantress, is on Earth, she actually ends up convincing one of the Dogs of Hell to work with her. And speaking of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., there is something else that is mentioned here briefly on the wall. When Karen actually goes to the New York Bulletin office, there are various framed photos in the background, which I'm going to go over in the next couple. But the first one I want to talk about is one that says Cybertech Settles. Now this is a direct reference to the Hydra organization which created Deathlock. Now some of the other things that are on the back walls is of course the Battle of New York framed up, which was here during Season 1, and this is of course referencing the Avengers New York incident, which aliens rained down from the sky. And the second one, of course, being the Battle of Harlem, which was reported on by Ben Urich, which is, of course, talking about the battle that took place in Harlem between the Hulk and Abomination. Now another corporation that seems to pop up all over the place, almost as much as Hydra, is of course the Roxxon Corporation. They have been prominent all the way from World War II, starting with Captain America, going on to Agent Carter, all the way to Iron Man, where they were officially shown off in some back of the buildings, and having effects all the way to today, being very prominent players in the Netflix series. Now some of you might have actually recognized District Attorney Reyes. This isn't the first time she has showed up in the Marvel Netflix series. She was actually in the Jessica Jones episode aka Smile, where she tries to pin Kilgrave's murders on Jessica Jones. Now throughout the show there are multiple references to Warzone. The word Warzone is of course brought up multiple times. Now this is actually a bunch of Easter eggs all in one. first referencing the version of the movie which was seen in 2008 starring Ray Stevenson, who would go on to play Volstagg in the Thor movies, but this is also a reference to the comic book series which has been running since the 90s, referenced to as Punisher Warzone. So in the later part of the second season, we actually get to catch up with the Kingpin, who is of course locked up in prison. Now here we actually get to see how he gets the name the Kingpin, and Wilson Fisk officially becomes the Kingpin of crime inside of the prison, and now he starts playing the long game until he gets out and becomes the Kingpin of crime in New York City. So another nod to comics is of course involving the Punisher. Now this actually involves the death of his daughter, which is described in very gory detail. This is a nod to Garth Ennis' Punisher Max. Now in this season, we also see the return of the Red Ninja, aka Nobu. Now much like Marvel has been shown to do in history, they like to mess with familiar things and change them in the cinematic universe, and Nobu is no different, because in this version, he would be known as the ninja assassin Kirigi, and just like in the comics, he can come back from anything, besides decapitation. Now a lot of people might have actually been surprised that the Punisher gets captured and thrown into prison. This is actually lifted directly from the comics, where he has actually went to prison before. And speaking of prisons, if you guys didn't know, they actually reference Cell Block D. Now this is very important to Matt Murdock, because there is a very awesome story, and is one of my personal favorite Daredevil stories, called The Devil in Cell Block D, where Matt Murdock actually gets put into jail and he has to live with all those people that he put in there in Cell Block D. Now referencing back to the Punisher, when the media is trying to figure out a name for him, one of the few names is actually Killdozer. Now this isn't a name that they just kind of throw out there. This is a direct reference to other Marvel characters. One related to Tony Stark Iron Man and Obadiah Stane's Ironmonger, and the second being far more ridiculous, Killdozer was actually an ancient spirit that possessed a bulldozer. I'm not making this up. I'm not, I swear. Now throughout both seasons, we've actually gotten a lot of hints about Karen Page's past, but we still don't know what it is. This season actually goes more into that. Now we don't know on what extent they're going to be using anything, if they're going to go down the pornography and heroin route. I don't think they will, but they're clearly going down the same route as Daredevil Born Again, which is actually also a nod to the character Nuke, who appeared in Jessica Jones. Next up, the People vs. Frank Castle. Now the scenes in the show are actually far different from what happens in the comics, as in the show he's represented by Murdock and Nelson. In the comics he actually chose to do everything himself. Now here's an interesting one that obviously wouldn't make it in here. Now when they reference the Blacksmith and his name, it's a little more complex than what you think. Instead of being the Clancy Brown character, which we all know from the show, he is actually a Skrull, who are of course the shape-shifting aliens that we saw in Avengers, or at least a form of them which were known as the Chitauri. Now of course another familiar character that ends up making her return to the show is Claire Temple. Now we've actually seen her all over the place, as she had a pretty prominent role in quite a few moments in Jessica Jones. But going along with that is of course going to be Mike Coulter's Luke Cage, who is mentioned not by name but just in passing. And speaking of Luke Cage, if you actually end up watching the whole series through, at the end of the last episode you will get a teaser for his TV series coming out of September 30th. And as I just mentioned Jessica Jones references, there's actually one that is going to see the one and only Foggy Nelson actually get a role in the Jessica Jones second season, or at least I assume he would, because Hogarth actually ends up showing up. Now Hogarth is the person that works very closely to Jessica Jones, and she offers him a job at her company, which he ends up taking, which would mean at some point in Jessica Jones season 2 we will see these two crossover and meet each other. Now, one thing that might piss a lot of people off, and it kind of catches me off guard, is Electra's death. Now, in the show, it is handled a far different way than it is in the comics, because in the comics, it is actually committed by Bullseye. Now, as he didn't make an appearance in this, that is all removed, so if we're ever going to see Bullseye, it might be a very different incarnation. He might not even end up doing this, might end up doing an actual killing to someone like Karen Page, and flipping everything in the MCU on its head like they tend to do with familiar scenes. Now the cop Brett, who is one of Foggy's friends, actually ends up doing a quote from Clemens. Now Clemens was actually seen in Jessica Jones and was the one that Simpson, aka Nuke, ended up taking out. Now going all the way back to Melvin's actual laboratory where he's inventing all sorts of contraptions, we actually see a pair of stilts in the background. This is of course referencing Stiltman. Now there is a scene that doesn't necessarily reference or Easter egg anything from the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but it is a reference to another Disney property. In the 4th episode where Karen visits Frank's house, on the wall there is an actual drawing of Luke Skywalker fighting Darth Vader, of course being a reference to a Disney-owned property, Star Wars. Now another big one which people don't seem to be picking up on is mentioned multiple times. Now the first time we actually got a mention of this character was in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. when Skye mentions she has a friend named Micro. And at the end of the season, we actually see Frank Castle get a CD that says Micro on it. Now this is a reference to Microchip, who is a quote-unquote sidekick to the Punisher, who actually provides a bunch of tech info and hacking skills to Frank to make him actually doing the murders a lot easier. Now there is an actual Easter egg referencing to Captain America the Winter Soldier. In episode 5, Electra says to Matt, "On your left," as she passes him. This is of course a reference to when Captain America laps the Falcon. Now in the second half of the 2nd season, we actually get to see a redhead appear, and she's working alongside the Hand. This is actually a character from the comics known as Typhoid Mary, or at least a version of her, because the rights to some of the characters are kind of meddled up with Fox, and at one point she's kind of been referenced as a mutant, so we don't really know how they're going to take it, but it's definitely a version of that character. Now here is a big one that might be important to some of you Spider-Man fans out there. Now in one of the episodes, I believe it is episode 3, there is a cop in the background and he says, "Alright Stacy, do me a favor," over the radio. Now could this be a reference to Captain Stacy, of course the father of Gwen Stacy? So that is all the Easter eggs that I have for you guys in this video. Hopefully you enjoyed this. If there are any that I missed or any that are discovered after this, please let me know in the comments below. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this, and we'll see you next time. Hey guys, Armin here, just reminding you that this video was made possible thanks to patrons. If you guys are interested in supporting us and making sure we keep the lights on, check out our Patreon where you can join other fans in supporting the CBC, delivering content you guys have come to love and expect. And if you can't do that, give us a like and a subscribe. That goes a long way too.